Hello and welcome. The drill docking and charging station seems to be a pretty common shop project. It is a very handy place to store your drills and chargers, as well as some other bits and pieces that go along with your drills. I also wanted mine to hold my brad nailers and staplers, as well as all the nails and staples that go along with them. Like a lot of my projects, I try to reuse something that we already have. So I was looking at using some PVC piping to hold the drills, since I already have some on hand. But I don't have much of the bigger pieces that I often see used on other drill charging stations, like this one by Glass Impressions. A link to his video below. He did a great job on that one, but I don't have enough large tubing to make one like that, since I used it all on the new chicken feeder. I'll put a link on screen for that video if you're interested. I do have some smaller PVC tubing, but I don't see this used very much. So I came up with my own design that uses these tubes to hold up the drills and nail guns. I also have some Baltic birch plywood left over from the dust collection cart. Link on screen for the video for that one if you're interested. So the size of the charging station will be decided by the dimensions of the leftover plywood. I wasn't even sure if this design would work and hold drills and nail guns. So I created a little mock-up of one of the drill holding bays? I guess we'll call them bays. After the mock-up and testing, I found that the drill fit, but had too much wiggle room, and the bay was too wide for some of the nail guns, and only part of the nail gun was held in place. The nose of the nail gun dropped through the tubes and just dangled there. So I went back to SketchUp and reduced the size of the holding bays. I originally had 6 holding bays, but after my testing and my changes, I ended up with 7. That should hold all I have and more. I also used SketchUp to lay out all my parts on a model of the plywood so that I could make the most of the cuts and try not to waste any material. With my design ready, I headed to the shop to get started. My first task was to cut my plywood on the table saw, and I did that, but the battery in my camera died before I got started, so we will have to imagine what that would look like. My table saw blade is definitely getting dull. I have a lot of tear out in the cut, so I have to clean some of that off with some sanding. Then I move over to the miter saw and cut the pieces to length. This blade needs some sharpening as well. Look for a future video where I find a way to sharpen all my saw blades. I'd rather do it myself than send it out to someone to be sharpened. Now I have all my pieces cut and I'm ready to do the dados on the sides. When setting up my dado stack, I used a piece of the work material to set the stack height. Then put it all in the saw, but I didn't test it on a piece of scrap. For some reason, I figured everything was just the right size and went ahead and cut into my workpiece without testing anything first. As you might have guessed, the dado stack was too thick, and now I have a permanent reminder to test on scrap before cutting into your work material. After pulling out the dado stack and resizing it, I cut into some scrap and confirmed the fit, then made the other 3 cuts. With the dado cuts done, I put the pieces together to see how it all fit, and other than my extra wide dado, it all looked good. To get the spacing correct for the drill bays, I cut a couple of 2x4 scraps to size and clamped the pieces into place. Next, I wanted to round over the corners of the top of the sides, and I happen to have a bunch of dado shims on my workbench, so I used one of those to mark the corners and then cut it with the jigsaw. I think this blade is dull as well. I gave them a quick sanding with the belt sander and finished them off with the sanding mouse. This mouse was worth every penny. You can stick any hook and loop paper to it, and it's always close at hand for quick and easy use. Up until now it was all fairly easy stuff. The real challenge for me was the PVC tubing. The tube was coiled up and has held some of that shape. I tried a few things to get the bend out of the tube, and it did help a bit, but the tube was still a little warped. Since making this charging station though, I did see a video from Dorban Orvar where she heated some sand and poured it into the tubes. She was able to make some interesting shapes with the tubes. I may have been able to use that technique to straighten these tubes, but I did end up finding my own way to hold the tubes straight while I drilled holes in them and attached them in their locations. I used a couple of 2x2 scraps and squeezed them together around the PVC tube, making sure the tube was flat on the table and the bend in the PVC was parallel to the scrap wood. Then I squished it all together and then clamped it at each end. Once clamped, I drilled 3 holes and then use a countersink bit to clean up the holes. With the holes drilled, I keep the tube in the clamps and attach it to the plywood. Most of the plywood will have tubing on either side of it, so I have to make sure to offset the holes in the tubes, so the screws don't hit each other when you put it all together. Even with my clamping system, some of the tubes are not quite perfectly straight, but I think I can live with that. All the tubes are attached, so it's time to do a quick dry fit and mark out where everything will be attached. I noticed that one of my brad nailers was a little wider than the rest, so I'm moving one of the bays over a little to make it larger. But of course, doing this makes another bay smaller. I didn't have anything planned for this bay. It was just to be a place for any future tool that might fit. But after moving the bay to fit the brad nailer, I realized the extra bay was just the right size to hold one of my staplers. The staplers were going to live on the shelf, but now one of them gets its own parking spot. Time to attach the pieces with the tubes to the underside of the bottom shelf. I put the shelf on some of the work pieces so I could get it off the table and used my 2x4 blocks to space the drill bays. Clamped them in place, flipped it over, and put in a couple of screws. And there it is, the bottom of the shelf with all the drill bays attached. I gave it a quick sanding and then put the whole thing together to make sure everything fits. Everything looks good, so I take it apart and then put it back together with glue. The job is almost done, but some of the PVC tubes were cut a little long. During assembly, I made sure that the overhang was at the back of the piece, so now I use my Japanese pull saw to cut them flush with the plywood. I know there's probably some people out there cringing to see the saw used on PVC tubing, but it did a great job. It may not be the intended use for the tool, but sometimes you have to use what you have available. The last step is to add the backing. I used some of the chicken coop siding scraps and painted it white. With the backing on, we're 99% complete. I just need to add a cleat to the back, because this will eventually sit on my cleat wall, the wall that doesn't exist yet. I'm currently insulating the shop portion of the barn. Once that's done, I'll be able to set up a cleat wall for tool storage, and the drill charging station will have a home on that wall. But for now, I just have it attached to the wall over the miter saw. There, it's all done and on the wall. Let's fill it up and see how it looks. The tools all fit well, and there's still a lot of room on the shelves for any other drill or nail related items. I have yet to attach the chargers to the sides. That'll be done when I move it to its final location. The charging station turned out quite well. I wasn't sure how the smaller PVC tubes would work for holding the drills and nailers, but turns out they work really well. The tools slide in and out easily, and they're nice and snug. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe if you think I've earned it. And thanks for watching.